Somewhere in Amsterdam right now, there's a painting hanging behind bulletproof glass that people cry in front of. A Wheatfield, storm clouds rolling in, a flock of black crows tearing across the sky like the sky itself is panicking. And for over 100 years, people have looked at this painting and said the same thing. This is where Vincent van Gogh painted his own death. Days after finishing it, he was dead, shot in a field just like this one. So the story goes, he knew. He put it in the paint. But what if that's not actually true? What if the most famous prophecy in art history was never a prophecy at all? Stay with me, because the real story is stranger than the myth, and it's about to change how you look at this painting forever. Here's what almost nobody knows walking into a museum gift shop. Van Gogh didn't paint one masterpiece a year, agonizing over each brushstroke like some tortured genius in a movie. In roughly a decade, he made over 900 paintings and more than 1,000 drawings. That's not a hobby, that's an obsession running at full speed towards something. And in July of 1890, in a small French village called Auvers-sur-Oise, that speed hit its peak. He was painting almost every single day. Fast, urgent, like he was racing a clock only he could hear. Wheatfield with crows was one of those paintings. And for 100 years, the story was simple. Paint the crows, walk into the field, end it all. Case closed. Except the people who actually study Van Gogh for a living will tell you something uncomfortable. That story might be completely wrong. Let's go back to July 10th, 1890, 19 days before Van Gogh died. He writes a letter to his brother Theo. In it, he describes painting vast wheat fields under turbulent skies, and he says the paintings are meant to express sadness and extreme loneliness. So far, that matches the legend perfectly. But in the very same breath, he also says something the myth conveniently leaves out. He says the same fields are healthy and fortified, not just despair. Something alive in there too. That's not a suicide note disguised as a landscape. That's a man describing two feelings at once, the way actual humans do right before nothing in particular happens. And here's where it gets stranger. Van Gogh Museum researchers have gone back through the timeline and found something that breaks the entire legend in half. Wheatfield with crows wasn't his last painting, not even close. He made it around July 10th. He didn't die until July 29th. 19 days is a long time for a man supposedly racing toward his own ending. So what did he paint after the final painting? A canvas called Tree Roots. Tangled, chaotic roots tearing out of the earth, unfinished, abandoned mid-stroke. Historians now believe that's the one he was working on the actual morning he was shot. Not the crows, not the storm. A painting of roots ripped out of the ground. So if the crows didn't predict anything, where did this entire myth come from? Not from art historians, not from Van Gogh himself. It came from Hollywood. In 1934, a novelist named Irving Stone published a fictionalized biography called Lust for Life. In 1956, it became a film, with Kirk Douglas playing Van Gogh. And in that film, there's a scene that never happened in real life, but became more famous than the truth. Douglas, playing Van Gogh, is finishing the crow painting when real birds suddenly explode out of the field. Startled, he slashes them into the canvas in a frenzy. He staggers away, a gunshot rings out. Cut to black. That's it. That single invented movie scene is the reason millions of people today believe a painting can see its own painter's death coming. Not a letter, not a diary entry, a screenwriter's imagination. 66 years after Van Gogh was already in the ground. But here's the part that gets genuinely unsettling, because the myth about the painting isn't even the biggest mystery here. The bigger mystery is whether Van Gogh actually killed himself at all. For a century, the official story was simple. Vincent van Gogh, alone in a wheat field, shot himself in the chest, walked back to his room, and died 2 days later. Case closed, tragedy confirmed. Except in 2011, two Pulitzer Prize-winning biographers, Stephen Naifeh and Gregory White Smith, spent 10 years combing through police reports, letters, and interviews, and they came out the other side questioning everything. Their theory: Van Gogh may not have shot himself. He may have been shot by a 16-year-old boy named René Secretan. Picture this teenager, rich, bored, spending his summer in Auvers dressed up as a cowboy because he'd seen a Buffalo Bill Wild West show in Paris and couldn't stop reenacting it. He carried a real revolver as part of the costume, a revolver known to misfire. And according to locals, René and his friends spent that entire summer mocking Van Gogh, an odd, poor, older painter who wandered the fields talking to himself, baiting him, sometimes putting salt in his paints as a prank. This wasn't friendship, it was cruelty dressed up as fun. And on the afternoon Van Gogh was shot, witnesses placed him near the Secretans' family summer villa, not deep in some symbolic wheat field at all. Now here's where a forensic expert enters the story. In 2014, a handgun specialist named Dr. Vincent Thimayo reviewed everything we know about the wound, and what he found doesn't fit a clean suicide at all. To shoot himself exactly where the bullet entered, Van Gogh would have needed to hold the gun at an oddly impossible angle for his own hand. There were no gunpowder burns on his skin, no scorch marks, no tattooing around the entry wound, the kind you'd expect from a gun fired inches from a body. In other words, whoever fired that shot probably wasn't standing where suicide would require them to stand. Then there's the gun itself. It was never
never found at the scene, despite people searching that field for it right after the shooting. It didn't resurface until 1960, when a farmer dug up a corroded revolver buried in that same area decades later. In 2019, that same rusted gun sold in a Paris auction for over €160,000, bought as the gun that killed Van Gogh, even though nobody can actually prove that with certainty. And this is where the story turns from mystery into something almost tragic in a whole different way. If Van Gogh really was shot by René Secretan, maybe by accident during one of their cruel games, why would he protect the boy who'd spent the whole summer tormenting him? When police asked him directly if he tried to kill himself, his answer wasn't a clear yes. He said quietly, "I think so." Then he told them, "Don't blame anyone." Not "I did this," not a confession, a refusal to name anyone at all. Now, before you fully buy into the murder theory, you need to hear the other side, because plenty of historians push back hard. Van Gogh's own doctor, Paul Gogh, examined the wound within hours of the shooting and described it plainly as a man who had wounded himself. 2 weeks later, in a letter to Theo, Gogh used the word suicide direct with no hesitation, no confusion, no hint that anything strange had happened. Critics of the murder theory point out something simple but powerful. If this really was a cover-up to protect a rich teenager, it works so well that literally everyone around Van Gogh at the time, his doctor, his brother, the people who loved him most, all believed suicide without a second thought. No confession contradicts it. No deathbed accusation names anyone. Just an old man, decades later, in 1956, casually mentioning that he used to bully a strange painter in a French village. That's then evidence to rewrite history on. So where does that leave us? A painting almost everyone believes was his last, but probably wasn't. A death almost everyone believes was certainly suicide, but forensically doesn't add up perfectly either way. A myth born not from history, but from a novelist's imagination and a movie director's dramatic flirt. Layer all of that together, and you get something stranger than any single fact on its own. We didn't just misremember one painting. We built an entire emotional narrative, grief, prophecy, tragic genius, foreseeing his own end, on top of a story that was mostly invented decades after he was already gone. And maybe that tells you something about why we do this. Not just with Van Gogh, but with anyone who dies before we're ready to let them go. We go looking for signs. We go back through their last word, their last posts, their last paintings, searching for proof that some part of them saw it coming. Because the alternative, that death is often just sudden and senseless and completely unannounced, is somehow harder to sit with than a ghost story. A predicted death feels like it has meaning. A random one just feels like loss. Think about that the next time you scroll past someone's final photo, their final tweet, their final anything, and feel that urge to read prophecy into it. We do it because meaning feels safer than randomness. Van Gogh didn't paint his death into a wheat field. We painted it there ourselves 100 years later because a novelist needed an ending and we needed to believe someone somewhere always sees it coming. The crows in that painting were never a warning. They were just crows in just a field on just another Tuesday in July, painted by a man who, as far as we can actually prove, had every intention of waking up the next morning. 19 more days of paintings proved that much. Whatever truly happened in that wheat field on July 27, 1890, one thing is certain: it's far messier, far sadder, and far more human than the myth ever let it be. So here's the real question we're sitting with. If a mystery this scrutinized, with police reports and forensic experts and biographers, still can't tell us exactly what happened to Vincent van Gogh, what does that say about all the smaller, quieter goodbyes we think we understand in our own lives? What do you think actually happened in that field? Suicide, accident, or something we'll never fully know? Drop your theory below.